Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SlashFilmcast, the official podcast of SlashFilm.com. I'm David Chen, and with me are...
Devendra Hardwire.
Jeff Kanata.
And joining us today, our guest today has made a series of critically acclaimed indie films, including Brick and The Brothers Bloom, but he's fallen on some hard times. He wanted to join us on the show to promote his latest movie, which has only made $1.3 billion at the box office. It's a micro-budget mumblecore project called Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Rian Johnson, welcome back to the SlashFilmcast. How are you doing today, Ryan?
Hello, David.
Nice.
Oh, good.
Hey, Jeff.
John Williams would be proud.
Very
Hello.
happy to be back. Thank you for having me back here.
It's great
Exciting.
It's great to have you back on. We are super excited, and thank you for joining us in the midst of your busy schedule writing the new Star Wars movies.
Well, you're...
Before we get going, just want to mention you can find more episodes of this podcast at slashfilmcast.com. Email us your angry fan letters after this interview at slashfilmcast@gmail.com. And today, all we're going to be doing, we had the opportunity to talk with Ryan. We were going to do a normal episode this week, but we're like, forget about all that. We're just going to spend today geeking out about Rian Johnson and Star Wars: The Last Jedi in a spoiler-filled conversation. So that is what we have in store for you. Let's get going. Ryan, first of all, congratulations on the 4 Oscar nominations that The Last Jedi received today. That must be very exciting.
Oh, I am so proud of the team. It's our sound guys, the effects guys, and Mr. John Williams. And thank you. I'm so proud of them. They did such amazing work.
It is super cool. And also, before we get into kind of, I want to hear about your journey from Looper to Star Wars: The Last Jedi. But before we get to that, I did want to mention that you recently went trending on Twitter for using Jedi texts to defend
Ancient Jedi texts.
Ancient
So cool,
Jedi texts.
man.
Yeah, so
cool.
a lot of people had some beef with...
You're kidding. What? On the internet?
A lot of people had some beef with Luke Skywalker, and again, we're spoiling Last Jedi, but Luke Skywalker at the end of Star Wars: Last Jedi uses Force projection to do battle with Kylo Ren, and a lot of people were saying, well, you just invented this, you made this up, like, well, this was never set up. And on Twitter, you took those people down by showing a series of images where you take out some canonical texts and show that Force projection was a thing long before Star Wars: The Last Jedi.
Well, yeah, you don't. I mean, and it's interesting. I don't know. So this is absolutely a true story. When I was living up in San Francisco for a few months, trying to breaking the story for I better turn my email program off, or I could just read my email to you guys.
Please, go ahead.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Quit. Good. So when I was up going into Lucasfilm a few times a week and breaking the story for it, I was in the middle of trying to crack this whole thing with Luke and the ending, and I hadn't quite got it yet, but I had this notion of what ended up being kind of the projection thing that he does, and but I wasn't sure about it. I was like, is this okay? I swear to God, this happened. I was sitting in the lobby at Lucasfilm, like waiting for Kiri to come out because I'd forgotten my badge that day or something. And that book was sitting on the coffee table there in the lobby, and I picked it up and I just started thumbing through it, and I saw, advanced force powers, maybe there, and I turned to it, and it described exactly what you saw. I landed on that, and it was like a god ray came down or something. But for me, it was like showing it was because showing it is less about this is a canonical thing, and it's more about we're always making stuff up in this universe, and somebody made this up before, and so it's as long as Star Wars has been around, people have been adding to it. But anyway, I thought, I hadn't thought about the book for a while, and then the other day I literally just saw it on my shelf, and I thought, this would be a fun thing.
This would be a fun way to drag someone on the internet publicly.
No, that wasn't the intent. No.
So it was a thing where you actually read it in a book, and you're like, this would be cool in the film, and that the text.
Well, like I said,
formed the film.
It was this bizarre kind of because I had already sort of had the idea for it or something like it. And I was like, maybe he kind of because I wanted him to kind of, hand Kylo his lunch at the end, but I didn't know how to do that without a physical confrontation that would be satisfying. And so that they both would come, that obviously Kylo would survive. And so I had kind of like the first inkling of the idea of it. But then when I read that, I was like, oh, not only can I do this, but it kind of solidified, oh, it could be this. So yeah, anyway, it was a fun little blast from the past.
Gotcha.
Nice.
Very cool. So I was doing some research for this interview because I come prepared for these things, Ryan. And I was listening
You're
to your.
professional, Dave.
I'm professional.
Yeah.
Professional. I was listening to your interview on Jesse Thorne's Bullseye, and you were talking.
Oh, I had such a good time.
Yeah, it's a great interview, and a big fan of Jesse Thorne.
Such a sweet guy. Yeah.
And you were talking about how you got the offer.
By the way, just talk about a professional podcast host, Jesse. He's got his stuff. He's got his shit together. He's just so solid. Mm-hmm. It's just nice when that happens. Anyway, go ahead, Dave.
Okay. Yeah. No, thanks. I seek to emulate that. Ryan. Anyway.
Yeah. You should.
So I heard on Bullseye that you talked about the story of how Kathleen Kennedy offered you the job, and that you did not see it coming. And that you had some general meetings with her. And I guess I want to ask you about the time period before you got the offer, right? You had made Looper
right.
huge success. And where did you see your career going at that point? Like, what did you want to do? Were you intent on the next thing I want to make is a Star Wars film, or did you have like a number of projects in the works? Like, where were things before you got the offer?
Is there a half-finished script in a Star Wars shaped trash can right now?
Well, no, it's interesting. This is really true that I never in 1,000 years thought I would ever be up for a Star Wars movie. That just wasn't even in the back of my mind. So it's not like I was thinking that. No, I just, coming out of Looper, I thought, well, okay, it's time to write the next one. And I had this kind of really cool sci-fi concept that I got really excited about for this movie, and so I thought, oh, this is such a cool concept. I bet I can really dig into this. I'm really excited about it. And basically, I ended up it's kind of embarrassing, but I ended up spending a lot of time. I spent over a year trying to crack this script. And eventually I had the concept for it, but I realized looking back, I realized I kind of put the cart before the horse. Like, I was sort of seduced by what was cool about the idea, but I never really had the heart of it and like what it was actually about and what actually made it tick. And so I spent a lot of time kind of plugging away on it. And I had it essentially led to having I was trying to make this thing work, but I essentially had like a year and a half off, which was really nice. Like, had a great year and a half basically, but the script, I eventually, and much too late, realized this isn't working. And so after,
do you feel comfortable sharing the premise of the script, or?
I don't know. I might. Yeah, I don't know if I want to pitch the whole thing. I'm still hoping that I'll wake up in the middle of the night and say, "Oh, aha, it's this." Mm-hmm. And
Gotcha.
The premise is really specific. So I'll maybe at some point when I totally give up on it, I'll tell you about it. But,
so you're working on it and things weren't going well, and you were questioning your whole life decisions that led you to this point, basically.
Yeah, kind of. It's that. It's like Barton Fink a little bit, but not really, because I was having a great time that year, and it was nice to just kind of have like a year where I'm kind of working on this thing, but also reading books and just watching movies and kind of filling the tank back up. And especially looking back in retrospect, given that seeing now what I was about to go into, it was really nice to have that time to breathe. But anyway, much too late, I realized this isn't going anywhere. And so I put it aside, and I came up with another idea and just started working on that. And that's when this meeting with Kathy came up. And like I said, I had general meetings with her a few times before, and I had thought that I was walking into another one of those general meetings, and she kind of dropped the bomb on me.
Yeah,
And,
so just some context. Kathleen Kennedy, kind of the keeper of the flame for Star Wars, the driving force for Star Wars, overseer, as it were. And for those who don't know, Ryan, what is a general meeting? Like, what happens at a general meeting between you and a studio head?
So general meetings, and it can be with a studio head, it can be with a creative exec, it could be with, and it's this thing that happens where you go, it's a really common thing, where you basically, it's like a getting to know you meeting. It's weirdly kind of like a first date. You kind of just go in their office. It lasts about, I don't know, it lasts 20 minutes, half an hour. You go and you just sit down, there's small talk, and then there's just general talk about, well, what are you working on? And then kind of feeling out whether they have anything interesting that you'd want to work on together with them. And we call them, or I don't know, my friends and I call them water bottle meetings, because you always, would you like some water? Sure. And then you always have a half finished bottle of water, like Arrowhead or something at the end of it, that they end up piling up in your car, basically. These half empty bottles. So it was, it's a really common thing. And I had done that a few times with Kathy, which for me, I was just really excited to be sitting down and meeting her. She's such a, she's a legendary producer, and she produced, she had worked with Spielberg forever and Amblin, and going all the way back to, E.T. and Raiders. And I walk in her, and also her husband, Frank Marshall, obviously is a legendary producer too. And he worked with Bogdanovich on, Paper Moon, and he worked with, Orson Welles on Other Side of the Wind, like his final movie. He has deep, deep roots in stuff that I love. And so I walk in their office, and there's pictures of Frank on the set of Paper, like on the location shooting Paper Moon. And there's pictures of Kathy, like, back in the day. It was really exciting. And she was so cool, and we got along well. But I never, like I said, it wasn't even in, the back of my head at that point that she would actually offer me one of these.
Do you have any speculation as to what you could have said in one of these meetings that would cause someone to say, here's $200 million and the keys to the biggest franchise of all time?
I should have written down what I said. Because if it's repeatable, I should have written that phrase down.
Yeah.
No, I think it was just, I think it was Looper, and I think she was, I think she was, I don't know. I honestly, man, I have no idea to this day. It's almost as baffling to me as it probably is to you as to why she asked me.
Yeah, when it was announced, I was like, "What the f are these guys thinking?"
You and me both.
Even if you hadn't any inkling that she was going to offer it to you, had there been any point, even in your childhood and growing up, that you had fantasized about making a Star Wars film? And
my God, anyone, I think, who's ever, grown up with this and had their hands on the camera, that's the first thing you fantasize. Literally the first thing that I remember my dad, God, I must have been, I was really, really young. I must have been in, I don't know, 3rd or 4th grade. And my dad brought home one of those really old style video cameras. Was brand new at the time, that you have to actually hook up to a VCR, Yeah. And the first thing I did was I took it and I held it down at like knee height and ran it through the space between the coffee table and the couch. And I played it back, and I was like, "Oh my God, that looks exactly like the trench run in Star Wars." So it's literally, no, but I think any of us, who make movies, who grew up with Star Wars, it's impossible not to. But you also, as an adult, you never think you will. So
does that make it harder or easier when you're sitting down in front of that blank page and you're going to start writing a Star Wars film? Do you have all these ideas in your head of what you've always imagined you might do, or is it intimidating to live up to that childhood dream?
It's intimidating when before you've, I just speak from my own experience. It was intimidating before I started. So, when I got the job, and especially when it like broke on the internet and everyone started talking about it, and I was like, oh my God, I guess I'm actually doing this. It was really scary. And, but then when I sat down to write, it's actually the most fun I've ever had writing. And it was, I guess maybe because it wasn't really, it was a blank page, but I had a starting point because it was the second movie. I had The Force Awakens and these characters that I loved as a starting point. And I did come in and like, when Kathy and I, after she asked me if I'd be interested in it, we had a series of conversations, and basically my pitch was, look, the first movie is like the introduction, second movie is training. And by training, I mean, we take each of these characters and we really test their mettle. And so I said that would be my approach to it, is a very character-based approach where, we just start with each one of these characters we care about and figure out what the hardest next step is for each of them. And so having that trailhead to go from, it was also nice because that gives you a direction as opposed to just having a big cloud of childhood fantasies of wouldn't it be cool to see the Falcon do this or that you could get lost in. It wasn't like that. You had a specific purpose you were working towards. You had a set of characters you knew you were going to be working towards on that purpose. It actually, once I actually started doing the work, I found it felt really comfortable. And then all the childhood fantasy stuff is just fuel for the fire. Then it just helps, it doesn't add more pressure. It's just like this reservoir of your connection to this world that you're building a story in. At least that's what I found.
I know Devindra, we were talking about this interview yesterday. We were kind of chatting over what we had talked about, and I know Devindra had mentioned like what happened after you left that Kathleen Kennedy meeting? Like, did you have to like sit down and take a walk? Like what? What was your reaction to that?
I don't. You know what? I left it, and you know where I had to go to right after the meeting because I had the rest of my afternoon scheduled because I had no idea that this was going to happen. I remember really distinctly because I was friends even at that time, but this is way before Rogue One with Gareth, and I went to a rough cut screening of Godzilla right after it.
Wow!
And so I feel really bad because that whole screening, I was staring at the Godzilla movie. And obviously not thinking about that movie at all. And so at the end, I don't think I had any useful notes for that.
Yeah, I mean, you were contemplating this gigantic monster that was going to be incredibly intimidating instead of Godzilla, right?
And I came out there and I said, let them fight. Let's do it.
So as you were weighing the decision of whether or not to take on this life-altering opportunity, was there ever a point at which you were like, no, I'm not going to do this? Like, or what were kind of the pros and cons in your mind, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, well, I in the meeting, I think that it was, Kathy expected I would probably give a yes in the room, and I didn't. I asked if I could think about it.
Oh, wow.
That's, I still don't know how I did that. I guess I'm very lucky that my saying that, I think she found it amusing as opposed to insulting. So thank God. But what was the time frame on that? Had The Force Awakens hit theaters already? Oh, no. So this was, no, they were they were still prepping The Force Awakens. So right. They had for it, but they hadn't even started shooting yet. Wow. So obviously that was one of the first things I did was read the script for The Force Awakens, but there was no footage yet. Even when I read the script, they hadn't even started shooting. This is jumping ahead a little. I'll come back to the question, but when I was writing the script, they were shooting The Force Awakens. So wow. I didn't see a cut of it until the script was basically done. I was watching dailies and I was going off of the screenplay.
It's crazy that you were writing. I don't mean to diverge too far into this, but you were writing and you didn't really cast these actors and you hadn't even really seen them too much in their performances. I mean, several of these actors are fairly unknown, specifically, Daisy Ridley. And yet here you are writing a script that has already been cast for you in a large part.
Oh, it was so wonderful. If you can get J.J. Abrams to cast a movie, writing, do it. I did. Well, while I was writing it, though, I was watching the dailies. And so I did get to see quite a lot of of the performances, and which was wonderful. It was great. I'm really thankful that the timing worked out like that, both so that I could write based on seeing Daisy and John and Adam and Oscar and everybody in their roles. But also, I'm really, really thankful that I wrote it, before the movie came out, that I was writing entirely based on my personal reaction to the script and to what I was seeing, and not based on, I don't know, some kind of perception of the world's reaction to it, I guess. I think that made it, that made it more personal in terms of the launching points I chose for this story.
I can only hope that will be the same case for episode 9. I will just put that out there in the ether, and I hope that's the case that's happening now too.
I hope so too. I'm sure it is. Yeah.
We put the call out for questions yesterday on Twitter, and Jermaine Lucier asked if the feedback from Force Awakens in any way informed or changed the script for Last Jedi. It sounds like what you're saying is mostly no, right? Or completely no.
Entirely no. Yeah. No, which was, I think that's a really, really good thing. I think that, just being able to come at it storytelling-wise from a very pure place of, what did this make me feel? What do I see in these characters, and what do I think is the next step of it? But it also, just to say it does also mean that obviously a lot of the things that ended up taking hold in the fan community in terms of theories and who is Snoke, who are Rey's parents, and the fever pitch that those rose to, I obviously knew those were questions you had coming out of Force Awakens. I didn't have like the weight of the fan expectation of what the payoff for those questions would be in my head. And which again, I think is a good thing. And it also, it's, and I feel anyone who is, disappointed, which I totally get, that the questions didn't feel like they kind of didn't get addressed in the way they wanted them to. Like, I know that how much it means to you with a story you care about to come up with these ideas of what it could be, and to have what comes out be different than that. I know that doesn't, that never feels great. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that the timing of it was such that it's not like I was aware of those expectations and was kind of, trying to kind of purposefully poke people in the eye. I was writing kind of based on my honest gut reaction to what the most powerful turn of events would be to those, to those questions.
Do you think you would have done it differently if you had known that people had created all these like vast lineages of Snoke and stuff? Would you have? I
mean, probably not. We can get into it as we talk about it, but I mean, there's a reason with each one of those questions I ended up in the place that I ended up. And I mean, Snoke is a little different than honestly. I mean, Rey's parentage, it's very obviously a question in The Force Awakens, and it's something that we definitely play to in The Last Jedi. Snoke's heritage, I'll be honest, I had no idea. Like, where he comes from, I had no idea that was going to be a thing to the degree that it was. But the truth is, even if I had known that, and again, not to put down any notion of that being interesting. I think it's very interesting. It didn't have relevance to this story, and ultimately, even if I had reacted to it and put it in, I'm sure it would have gotten cut out at some point, whether it's in the writing or in the editing, just because it doesn't, it's not something that's important to any of our main characters.
It reminded me of that scene in Looper with the famous diner scene where it's like, well, we could talk about time travel and I could, pull out all the straws and everything, but I think it's very much your sensibility, which is like, that's not the important part. Like, where Snoke is from is not the important part, right? It's what he means to these characters let's talk about what matters, I suppose. And and it's also, you just start dramatically shaping something, and you realize, especially with a movie like this, you end up kind of carving everything down to the bone in terms of especially when it comes to backstory, in terms of the bare necessity of what you need to spend,
your time focusing on, and to make each one of these scenes as focused as possible on the dramatic intent. And and that's just not something that like I'm sure it would have gotten cut at some point, even if I had written it.
Just so you know, Dave, all my questions are about Looper going forward. So I don't know.
Let's do
Nice.
it.
Going back to that question, I imagine the question I asked about like what did you do after the meeting, and how did you weigh the cost of doing it? Like, because I imagine that accepting this gig comes with a lot of benefits, but it also means that this is something that's going to dominate your life for at least the next few years, and probably people will, I don't know, both love you and also complain to you for the next few decades, like probably forever, right? And so how did you kind of weigh the pros and cons of it?
At some point, David, I'll die, so it's not going to be forever. Don't worry. Well, no, I exactly. I mean, that's very well put, and also. And this is probably why I just had the gut reaction of saying, can I think about it? I mean, it's not like I was on like A lists or like, A-level lists or something for projects, but because Looper was like a higher level indie movie that had done okay, that had this sci-fi thing, I had been approached with like franchise stuff in the few years I was writing, and I just got very used to saying no to it. And it just, in my head, I just had the path of, no, I'm just going to do my own stuff. I'm just going to write and direct my own original stuff and stay kind of close to the ground. So that had just been the path I was on, and I didn't see anything changing that. But it's Star Wars.
Yeah.
And not just in terms of it's like the biggest thing, but it was my whole world when I was a kid. It was, this is nothing special. I think a lot of us who are fans have had this experience, but it's hard to overstate the importance in terms of the foundations of my creative life in terms of Star Wars. And so it just means something very important to me. And so it was something that kind of stopped me in my tracks. And I said, I have to think about this.
Right.
And I thought I would go home and make a list of pros and cons, like you're saying. But what I did was I went home, and for several nights, I didn't sleep really. I stayed up all night. And do you know like when you're sick and you realize I need to eat pineapple, your body has like a really specific, need that it communicates to you. I stayed up all night watching documentaries about mountain climber disasters.
Wow.
Much like, I can't remember the name of them now. They all have vaguely similar names. It's all like
one of my favorite ones is Touching the Void. Have you seen Touching the Void?
I watched Touching the Void. Oh yeah, of course.
Love that movie.
Yeah.
Love that movie.
Yeah. But there's a whole, you go down, and then I just basically went on if you enjoy Touching the Void, you'll enjoy it. And I just clicked on every single one of them and stayed up all night watching these.
I think we're forgetting about Cliffhanger here, everyone.
I did. No, it was all docs. I
all
should have done
docs.
Cliffhanger. Yeah.
So why when you were evaluating whether you should direct Star Trek, were you watching movies about people trying to surmount a massive obstacle and failing horribly?
David, you said Star Trek.
Oh, shit, Star Wars. Sorry about that.
Funny, Jesse Thorne. No, Jesse Thorne never did that. Trying to think back. Sorry.
That's hurtful. That's hurtful.
Yeah, you actually mean Jesse Thorne never made that mistake.
So did it was like cathartic release to watch these mountain climbers, go through these horrible disasters that help you make your decision?
Maybe. I have no clue. To this day, I have no real good analysis about why I just stayed up all night doing that.
There's
but I know that
symbolism.
Yeah, I don't know. But at the end of a few days of thinking about it and talking with my producer Ram, and watching a lot of mountain climbing documentaries about people losing limbs, it didn't end up being like a intellectual decision of pros and cons. It was just me realizing, nothing can make me happier than doing this, than my life being this for however long this is it, So, but even then it was a step-by-step process. It's not like I called and said, I'm in, and then a door was, closed behind me. It was step by step. It was sitting down and talking with them. It was reading the script for 7. It was going on a meeting with JJ, and there was kind of easing into it, sort of, which I think was a good thing.
So I kind of want to ask you. I want to get to the film itself very soon, but I kind of want to ask you about the reaction to the film and kind of how you've reacted to the reaction, because I can describe like what my reaction was watching the movie. I had a great time at the theater. I left on a high, and the critical reaction was rapturous after the screenings, right? And then there started to be some like rumblings in the day of release that like maybe there were certain corners of the internet that weren't super happy with the film, and and so I guess like I'm curious like how you approach criticism both from movie critics but also from general public. Like some people say like I just never read that stuff. You don't seem to take that approach. You seem to try to tackle these things head on. So
to some extent, I'm not above a little bit of hiding, but but no, I'll tell you, it was really interesting because I'll tell you exactly where I was on it. So that night of release of the movie coming out, I had done, because basically I'd been going around doing introductions to screenings, and so I was at the mall in Century City. And I was introducing a USO screening for military members and their families. And I got done with that screening. I had a couple of hours before the next thing I had to do. And so, I told the guy from Disney, why don't you just go home? It's okay. I know where to find my driver. I'll go the next thing in a few hours. I'll just hang out here at the mall, get some food. I'll just, putter around on my phone. It'll be fine. So I had 2 hours to kill at the Century City Mall when I started getting the first few hate tweets. And I have this memory of just this hellish kind of hour of being in the Century City Mall. And I had no, and the crazy thing is, like, thinking back on it, I had no perspective on these tweets. I had no perspective in terms of how big a group of people this was, even what they were upset about specifically. Over the next few weeks, I kind of was able to contextualize it and feel much better about it. But at that time, I thought, oh my God, does everybody hate this? Did I totally just mess up? Was I just wrong? And I had kind of a very dark hour of the soul thinking, because I had no context for any of this.
Right.
And
you had a dark hour where most dark hours occur at the Century City Mall.
At the Century City, that was the thing. I was wandering around. So to this day, I probably won't be able to go back there without just going into,
You're going to have like flashbacks at that Hot Topic.
Exactly.
But at this point, like there had already been, 95% positive Rotten Tomatoes reviews, right?
Not only that, but and I will say, even then at the beginning, and this has been consistent all the way through, 95% of the stuff that I get on Twitter is incredibly positive and very just like wonderful, and people wanting to share their experience of the movie, even people who have, criticisms about it. They're thoughtful, and it's the good stuff. And so even then, thinking back, I'll bet it was just like that same 5% of it. But of course, when even 5% of the people are saying, I hope you ruined Star Wars, I hope you die, that's what you're going to listen to and freak out about. Mm-hmm. So it was crazy.
Can I ask you a question about that real quick? Before the movie had even come out, we heard this announcement that you were getting another trilogy in the Star Wars universe, which I personally am thrilled for. I'm so excited for that. But with that long, dark hour of the soul at the Century City Mall and the repercussions and all the fallout, is there are you approaching it differently? Is there any no psychological baggage that will be around when you're writing those movies or any of that?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't know what. I don't know that it's. I don't know what that different kind of approach would be. I mean, I kind of have. You've got a way that you tell stories, and you just kind of do that. I think So and there's even in all the even in the time since, when I've had a lot more time to kind of process all the different, reactions people had. I mean, there's obviously the super extreme stuff, but even all the other the more thoughtful discussions going on with it. I don't know how this is going to sound, but there's nothing that I've read or seen that's made me think, oh God, I did kind of mess that up. I would have done that differently if I could go back. I mean, I still really genuinely believe in, all the decisions I made. I can't imagine I would have. I've spent, years kind of working through each of them and thinking through each of them. There's a reason I made each one of those choices. So, and I think that'll be the case with the next one. And it's funny, you can't ultimately at the end of the day, and I think anyone who writes or makes movies or does anything like that knows there's you put your head down and you do it, and you're in kind of an insular space while you're doing it, when you're actually doing the work. And so I honestly don't even know that it would be something I'd be capable of if I wanted to process that stuff and make that apart. But I think I just, you tell stories the way that it feels good for you to tell stories.
Mm-hmm. It's great.
I had a conversation with another director recently whose work is also relatively well known, and he said that he also absorbs a lot of criticism for his work, and he said, I'm okay absorbing it because 99% of the time it is better to be on my side of the table creating things than on the other side of the table criticizing the people creating things. And that's kind of how he justified or how he kind of thought through the criticism. And I guess what you're saying is that even with all the stuff people have said, you put a ton of thought into every one of those decisions. You wouldn't have really done it any other way.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, and also I think that again, the extremities aside,
right.
I think that all of the talk and the debate about first of all, I feel really, really good about the way that the movie has been talked about out there. The amount of thoughtful stuff that's been written about this movie just blows my mind. And not just from critics or column writers, people just posting stuff that they've written, just blog posts, about it, just talking through kind of the themes of the movie and the deep dives that people have done, really digging into it. I'm so thrilled we made a big movie that tons of people wanted to go see and that was entertaining, that also did that. I mean, that's kind of, for me, I feel, I don't know, very, very proud that the whole team kind of, and also that Lucasfilm and Disney let that happen, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. But the overall feeling coming away from it is not like, oh boy, I weathered the storm, but it was worth it. I feel really genuinely like this whole experience in total has been such a joyous one, of putting the movie out there and feeling the reaction to it.
Excellent. Well, let's talk about some of the decisions you made for the film. I think the film diverges from previous films in the franchise in some really interesting ways. And, I'll ask a few questions about that, and you can, first of all, tell me if you think my assessment is correct, but if it is, then I'm curious how you made some of these decisions.
Wrong.
Thanks.
Wrong.
Appreciate that.
I should have a buzzer.
That's what the banjo's for.
That's what the banjo's for. Okay. Right.
Obviously, one of the most interesting decisions is the reveal of who Rey's parents were. And that they were no one special, that she wasn't a Skywalker or anything like that. And so, yeah, talk a little bit about how you arrived at that decision. I think there's a lot of people that actually think that it might not be true or that it might be undone in the next film. But talk about that decision, why that was important to you, because lineage has been an important thing until now in the Star Wars franchise. Sure. So yeah, let's talk through that.
Well, I'll give a couple of caveats before. I'm not involved in writing episode 9, so I have no idea what's going to happen in 9. And as we know in these movies, there's always space for a certain point of view. So I don't know what's going to happen next. I know it'll be awesome. I know it'll be satisfying, whatever they end up doing. But so that caveat. Also, I'll give the caveat that and this is something that I'm still the same way that I'm still kind of, you asked me before, like, how do I just personally deal with these kind of criticisms
Right.
thrown at me? The truth is, I don't know. This is my first rodeo with something like this. I'm figuring it out and trying to just do my best. And like, I'm kind of taking it step by step. So the other thing I kind of don't know is how much to actually talk about it. Because I don't want to short circuit. Not that I think I would. And that's kind of why I said, well, fine, I'll come on, let's talk about it. Because I realize it's nothing I say is going to actually, like, my initial concern was, well, once I kind of say what I think, is that going to be something that people will just like point to and say, he said this, and then just fight more about it, as opposed to coming up with their own ideas. But I don't think that's going to happen. So, because no one listens to what I say, David, as you know. So what was I saying? So anyway, the other thing is, I'll explain my reasons. But my reasoning for doing it is separate from, I guess, and this applies to everything I'm going to say for the rest of the conversation, because I don't want anybody who had stuff in the movie they didn't like to feel like my explanations are trying to like dismiss their feelings about it. I guess, if something that I'm describing you didn't like, I'm not arguing that you should have liked it. I'm telling the reasons why I got there, basically.
Got it.
So anyway, which is probably all self-evident. Anyway, so what was the question?
Raised parentage, yeah. Within, someone in our podcast Slack brought this up today, that it was introduced that like Darth Vader had killed Luke's father, and then later you find out, well, he killed him in a sense, and that maybe like in the next film it could be like Rey's parents were nobody in a sense,
I have no.
So anything could happen. But that being said, your decision making.
That being said, in this movie, I mean, there were a couple different. And by the way, and it's funny. Recently, I found my old writing laptop and I went back through it and I looked at. I created like this thing that I called the big ass document that I would send to Kiri Hart at Lucasfilm, like, a few times a week. I just kept updating this big document where I would just basically type through my thought process with each of these big questions. And when it gets to the thing about Rey, I actually go through and I made a list. Well, here's all the possible things that it could be. And here are the upsides and downsides of each of them. And for me, the answer that we come to in this movie, or that is presented to her, and I've talked elsewhere about this also, but there are kind of two elements to it. The less important one to me, but still the one that I think holds weight, is the notion of disconnecting it from strict lineage, the idea of opening up the world a little bit more, so that it's not just that you have to be related to one of several people in the galaxy in order to be special. And I think that if if Star Wars is gonna move beyond it, we have to do that at some point. But and also there's just something kind of appealing about the notion of it's kind of the anyone can be president sort of feeling of the Force, and I think it just makes Rey's character, I think, a little cooler. However, none of that would be important if the second point didn't apply. And the second thing, which is the really important one, was just a dramatic question, a question of dramatic impact. Going back to that initial thing that I said to Kathy, the object in this movie is to find, it's like the second act of a film, is to throw complications at these characters, to find their weak spots and press on them, and to find out who they are by making life very hard on them. And really, what the question of what should the answer Rey's given in this movie be, boils down to, what is the hardest thing she can hear? And the hardest thing in my mind, the easiest thing she could hear is, oh yeah, you're related to so-and-so. Oh yeah, you're Luke's daughter, or you're a Kenobi, or you're a Palpatine, or whatever it is. Here's your place in the movie. That would be both the easiest thing for Rey and for us, because her whole quest is for, how do I fit into this? I want to know my place in all of this. If it's handed to her via lineage, that seems, again, that felt like that would be exactly what she and we as an audience would want to hear. Obviously, because there are a lot of fans who obviously really wanted to hear it. Mm-hmm. The hardest thing she could hear is no, you're not going to get that easy answer. You're not going to get you're not going to be defined by this. You're going to, and not only that, but you not getting this answer is going to be used against you by Kylo in the last scene that you have together to really try and tempt you into, you can't lean on that, so are you going to lean on him instead? And you're a hero, so you're going to have to stand on your own 2 feet. I talk about sometimes how it's weirdly similar to the "I am your father" moment with Vader. Mm-hmm. It's oddly going for the same impact that moment had, but with the inverse answer. "I am your father" was the hardest thing that Luke could hear in that moment in the audience, because it takes what was a very simple bad guy and suddenly turns him into something much more complicated. And to do that with Rey, to give Rey and the audience that moment of, oh no, it had to be the exact opposite answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's so cool that you phrase it like that. I love that description of the process, because it sort of makes some of that reaction from the audience inevitable, because you are literally by intention giving them the most uncomfortable moment. It's the best thing for the story because it puts the audience in a position that they didn't want to be in.
And I'll tell you, that's been a really fascinating thing the past few weeks, and the past month in seeing this. And I want to be careful how I phrase it. I don't want this to come off as I don't know. But seeing how the audience reaction in general plays so much into the actual themes of the movie in this strange meta way almost has been really, really amazing. And so anyway, but I think you're absolutely right.
We got this email from listener Bradley Martin from Canada, and I shared this with you, Ryan. It really made that scene with Rey in the cave kind of lock into place for me. He writes, "In Rey's vision, we see hundreds of her in a line, these being hundreds of identities of who she is, who she's supposed to be, why she is. It had to start somewhere," she tells Kylo Ren, "only to find her beginning was 2 passing shadows. She'll never know her father's hair, her mother's eyes, what they enjoy or hate, a constant identity crisis with a lifetime full of questions, the most horrific of these being, why didn't they want me? Just a heads up, Star Wars fans, orphans are real and are plagued by these thoughts every day. Film speculation is fun, but the idea that Rey can't be the character she is without a Jedi Master parent has to stop. You don't need a Skywalker or Kenobi in your family tree to make the world a better place," end quote.
Isn't that beautiful? I mean, even beyond just like his description of it, and this is what's been so cool over the past month, seeing people take the movie and apply it to what they care about in life and find things like that in it that I never could have expressed that way, because that's a personal thing a reaction he had. And I just think that's so cool.
Yeah, related to that scene, actually, I think the visual representation of that whole sequence is kind of amazing. Like, I'm wondering, where did that idea come for you? Were you inspired by something in terms of how to represent those multiple Reys?
It was weird. That was a very, very early visual idea that I had that was kind of disconnected from anything. Before I went to San Francisco, one of the very first things I did was there's this guy, Rick Carter, who is he's a production designer who works with Spielberg a lot, and he's also he worked on The Force Awakens. He's also just kind of the secret like Yoda of these movies. He's he's a really amazing guy. He's a very deep thinker. He's very basically I Ram, my producer, knew Rick a little bit, and he said, "You should go out." It was like telling Rey at the end of Force Awakens, "You should go to this island." And he says, "You should go out to Malibu and you should talk to Rick." And I said, "Oh, okay." And so I went out there, and for a few weeks, I kept going back, and we would just walk down the beach for like entire afternoons, talking not about set pieces, not about design, not even about Star Wars, but talking about like just spiritual stuff, talking about our families, talking about, we get into the characters a little bit, but it was always in the context of the most abstract kind of, what does this mean to me type stuff. And I can't tell you how. I mean, and so anyway, the mirror sequence kind of came out of those few weeks. And also, I can't tell you how amazing it was at the beginning of a process that turns out a movie that's, whatever, like a big, it's from the outside, like the cynical view of it is it's this big machine that Disney's creating to turn out toys and money. And regardless of even that element of it, it was going to be this big machine of a process. To have the beginning of it be just these philosophical talks with this awesome dude on the beach in Malibu set the tone for the entire creative process in a way that I think was really, really wonderful. But anyway, I just had this vision of this idea of a million Rays going off into infinity. Her whole search for identity. I looking back through my notes, at one point I had the wacky idea of like, I was like, oh, should it be like a 2001 type thing where like each one of the Rays is a little younger? And as she goes down the line, it's younger and younger and younger Ray going back to her origin. And then when you get to the end, it's like the Space Baby in 2001 where it's baby Ray and there's a shadowy figure holding the baby who you think is the mother. And then it reveals that it's Ray holding herself as a baby, like really wacky stuff like that, Yeah, that would have been, exactly. It would have probably just ended up playing silly. And so there's a reason I didn't go that way. But being free at that point to think about stuff like that in the context of a Star Wars movie, I don't know, and I guess I would also just say to any fans who think about like, how are these trilogies being created? How are these new movies being created? I hope it's comforting to hear that was like the Lucasfilm endorsed first step, I guess.
Huh. Wow.
Yeah, I was reading your interview with Peter Serta from SlashFilm, and you were saying how the whole Ray idea in the cave is that, like, that cave takes you to what you fear the most, and what she fears the most is that there is no answer, that she only has herself, right? Something along those lines?
Yeah, something along those lines. Yeah.
So really interesting way of realizing that. Yep. Go ahead.
Visually, because I'll never miss an opportunity to recommend people see this movie. That there was also a visual inspiration from Under the Skin, from that sequence in Under the Skin with the boy. Yeah. And we actually got the effects company. They're called One of Us. That did that sequence to work on the Mirror Cave sequence. If anyone hasn't seen Under the Skin, it's a masterpiece. It's one of the best science fiction movies ever made, I think.
Amazing film.
Yeah.
One thing that I saw that was an interesting reaction to the reveal of Rey's lineage is this idea that, like, even though lineage is no longer important for wielding and taking advantage of the Force, that Rey still represents a 1 in a billion or 1 in a trillion person, right? That it's not like, I guess this question is, what are the implications of Broom Boy at the end of the movie? Are we supposed to interpret that as like, oh, everyone can be as good as Rey, or is it just that Rey is like 1 in a trillion, and therefore it's still extremely selective who has the ability to be great at the Force?
Well, it's interesting. I guess that's an interesting interpretation of it, isn't it? I guess I don't think of it in those terms, I suppose, because ultimately these stories are still, each one of them is a hero's journey, and this is Rey's hero's journey, and that means that it's not making a statement about who in the world is allowed to have special powers. Mm-hmm. A story like this is about the person who's watching it, and it's about it's always about finding your way in the world, and you watching this myth that gives you some kind of roadmap for some version of that. That's what, going back to the original stories, that's what they're about. So, and honestly, that's also why the whole dismissing the lineage thing was of much secondary importance to me, because I actually don't think that, the original trilogy, it's not saying that only people born of a certain lineage of royalty are special. That's just a way of representing this notion of this archetypal hero who has a special purpose, and it's just speaking to each and every one of us, saying there's that version of that hero in you, and you're gonna have to go through some kind of internal version of this big projected myth in your own life as you're going from childhood into adulthood or whatever it is, if that makes sense.
I find it so interesting that you speak of Rey's hero journey, which clearly these movies are, and yet you really only got to write the middle chapter. And as you said earlier, you don't have any hand in writing her final chapter or any of these characters, maybe not final, but third chapter. Are there things that you were hoping get picked up on from this movie? Are there hooks that you put in the movie that you hope get fulfilled? Are there things that you would be really disappointed to see? Like if we saw Rey turn to the dark side, for example, would that bum you out? Are you sitting here like an audience member thinking about what this third movie could be?
I'm absolutely sitting here exactly like an audience member. And I think it's probably, getting yelled at by certain people who it didn't go the way they expected is probably softening me a little bit in my forming very hard expectations that the next movie better do this or else. And no, I know that it's, first of all, first of all, from foremost, I have faith in JJ and in Chris Terrio, in Chris, who's writing it with him. That they're terrific storytellers, and I know that they're going to give something satisfying, even if it's not what I'm expecting. And I'm sure it won't be what I'm expecting. There's no way it could be what I'm expecting. That's what's fun about it. I also, though, know it'll be satisfying in a way that because these movies are mythological and because they are ultimately heroes' journeys, that means they have a certain gravitational arc to them. And however that arc ends up getting fulfilled, it will get fulfilled. The rainbow's going to touch down, to Earth at the end of it. How that ends up happening, that's the fun.
Yeah.
One of the most interesting decisions this movie makes is it posits that brash hot-headedness won't get you very far. We see again people that are brash and hot-headed and make these crazy decisions based on information they believe to be superior. They end up getting flummoxed again and again throughout the film. And this is kind of a stark divergence from the rest of the franchise. I feel like in past films, the hotheads have been pretty successful. And so, do you agree that it's a divergence? And if so, why was this theme important for you to communicate in this film?
Yeah, well, sure. It's definitely a divergence. I think that and largely the theme that you're talking about is demonstrated in Poe's arc. Yes. And again, though, it's not like I sat down and first and foremost on my mind was, how do I subvert the hothead hero mythology has been built in? No, I sat down and thought, okay, who is Poe? And the truth is we know very little about Poe from the first movie. He's a very cool character. Oscar Isaac has all the charisma in the world. But the truth is he's a hothead hero. He's the best pilot in the galaxy and he's awesome. It's funny looking back at the I told you about going through my old writing notebook. I found like the very first draft I wrote that I didn't even show Lucasfilm because it was awful. And in the very first draft that I wrote a whole script where Poe goes off on the mission to Canto Bight with Finn, and Rose doesn't exist in it, and it's the MRA's wet dream of a script. It's just the guys. And at the time, I thought, "Oh, this will be awesome! It's Butch and Sundance, and they're going off together on this adventure." And I wrote it, and even while I was writing it, I was aware, "Oh my God, this is so boring," because those two guys can't challenge each other. They can encourage each other, and that's what they do for the appropriately brief amount of screen time that they have in The Force Awakens. It's awesome. They're encouraging each other. They give each other feel good. It's like you can do it. But they don't have built into their character the tools necessary to challenge each other, which is what each one of them had to be challenged. I learned that by trial and error, basically, by doing it and seeing, oh my God, this tool doesn't work for this. So then the question was, okay, I'm going to split them up, and that's great because that means that rather than Poe serving Finn's arc, Poe can have his own arc. And then it was the question, what is Poe's arc? Okay, what do I know about Poe? I know he's a hero. What is the tough thing you could, and that's when the whole idea of heroism versus leadership came up, especially in relation to Leia. Because at the same time, I was thinking about Leia's character, and I was thinking about this character who's kind of been defined by loss throughout her entire, for as long as we've known her, going back to the first movie. And the idea of showing Leia starting to kind of bow underneath the weight of just all of this loss that she's had, and how she's seen all of these hotshot pilots come and go, and obviously Han being the most recent one, just realizing that, that could be a really interesting thing, the wisdom of Leia, and a different type of wisdom that could, that suddenly connected up with Poe. And I thought, okay, heroism versus leadership, that's a really interesting contrast. And what would the lesson be there? And that seemed like a very exciting thing to play with in a Star Wars movie.
Got it. Well, Ryan, we have at this point in the conversation a bunch of random nerd nitpick questions to throw.
Ooh, I love it.
Before you get there, can I do one more thing? I just don't want this to go by.
Yeah.
I know that Ryan talked to the far superior Jesse Thorne about this a little bit. But I didn't want to go by without talking just a little bit about Carrie Fisher, because
it's interesting. Jesse asked me about Carrie.
Yeah. We're just trying to learn from the best is what we're trying to do. Emulate the best until you fake it till you make it.
Me too.
But people who listen to this show know that and have made fun of me a lot because I've talked so much about how very, very few moments in this movie I was not crying watching it. And a lot of that are the layers of watching Carrie Fisher in her last film and seeing her ostensibly die and then come back to life, and knowing that she can't do that in real life, and all of those layers that existed in watching it after the passing of this amazing actress. I don't know if there's not much of a question there. I just would love for you to speak to that. And was there any? I know you talked to Jesse about the considerations of what you might do with her character, but I wonder if there's a subtler point to be made about feeling like maybe you were taking advantage of her death in a weird way, or was there any worry on that level?
No, there was worry. Absolutely, there was, and there was worry on every level. We didn't know. It was like, I remember just that feeling of coming back into the office after that Christmas break and sitting down and watching the scenes through and just feeling the weight of, what do we do? And, in terms of what you mentioned, it's a very interesting thing in terms of feeling like, God, because it's impossible to watch it without the extra, the extra emotional weight of everything you just described being laid onto it. But I don't know. I felt like at the end of the day, that was both inevitable, no matter, even if we had done alterations or what, I'm not sure what we would have done. We're not going to cut her out of the movie for fear of that, because it's a beautiful performance and I think people deserve to have it, and she's wonderful. And so, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's like there is this kind of whole other, and it's impossible for me to even know how the movie would play if Carrie were still around. It would be different. I don't know. The truth is, I just don't know.
It sounds like you went through. There's obviously you probably considered every permutation, right? Like. Reshooting the entire film completely, like removing her character entirely, or having her say goodbye, or having her character pass at an earlier point in the film, which she doesn't. Her character does not die in the film, right? Even though she comes close.
Exactly.
So you probably considered like every one of these possibilities, right?
Absolutely, and we thought about. It's absolutely, we did, and there was no, but I didn't deep dive into any of them because I very instinctively felt like I very instinctively felt like none of them would be truly emotionally satisfying, or as satisfying as seeing her complete performance. And I think at the end of the day, it was, it's the scene that she has with Luke. It's the goodbye scene. And it's her last scene in The Falcon with Rey. And we have everything we need. And those last words in the movie being words of hope. And there was no version where we manufactured some kind of earlier, death for the character that could keep both of those scenes. And there was no version of an earlier death for the character that I felt like would be emotionally satisfying enough to justify losing those scenes,
Right.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. All the things you say, absolutely, man. It's all just this complex mix of stuff. And what it's at the end of the day, I just felt deeply that this is a beautiful performance, and we leave the movie with Carrie as Princess Leia giving us those words, and I want that.
I'm so grateful for that decision, because it's something that meant a lot to me. Every time I've seen the film at this point, it gets me, and it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you made that decision.
Yeah, there must have been like some the idea of like, if you could figure out a way to streamline the story, you still would have been leaving a huge part of this performance on the cutting room floor, and that would have been unacceptable, right?
And resolving it in a way. I mean, honestly, if there were some magic key I could have turned where it's like, oh my God, we can just do this, and that'll be an incredibly beautiful, moving, fitting end to, the character, then I would have absolutely considered it. The truth is just, the movie was shot and put together, and there was just nothing that I could see in it that was that. And so, yeah. And to layer into that, we were all going through, it's extra complicated because, as much as I had become friends with Carrie, I was going through just personal grieving as well. And so all the stuff that you feel when you're watching it, just from knowing that character growing up, I was also watching a friend of mine on screen who I just lost. It was a lot, Anyway, but
sure. Well, thank you for speaking to that. I appreciate it.
Yeah. And actually, speaking of like multiple permutations, you said something earlier that I kind of wanted to just dig into a little bit. You said that you had the big ass document where you tried to like every possibility with Rey's parents. And like, I'm curious, obviously you've already spoken to some of those possibilities. Maybe Rey's dad is Obi-Wan, maybe Rey's dad is Luke Skywalker. Were there any possibilities on that document that might surprise people that you considered?
The instant I say any one of them, there's going to be a headline, "You won't believe who Rey's parents almost were."
So true.
You've seen right through me, Ryan. You've seen right through me.
I'm trying to think. I mean, I listed everything I could think about, even awful possibilities where I said, this is not what we're going to do, but, or even like, wouldn't it be fun? Okay, is she, everything from, I mean, the less silly one is like, oh, is she a clone? Is she a this? Anything that's a theory on Reddit now, I guarantee was listed in that document.
What was the most silly one, if I may ask?
Silliest one was, is she a robot? Okay, we've seen a biomechanical, realistic flesh hand on Luke. Could the technology have advanced sufficiently in the 30 years? And then Kiri and I just started laughing. We said, no. Please, I look forward to you won't believe what Rey was actually a robot, almost a robot. And
well, at least you gave us some clicks. We appreciate
exactly. That's
that headline will happen, and I'm sorry from the bottom of my heart, Ryan. Let's move on to some of these geek nitpick questions. This is kind of a lightning round, but at the same time, if you want to dig deeper into this, into any of these, I'm happy for you to. So this. You talked about this recently on Twitter about Luke's prosthetic arm, and when Luke when Luke vanishes at the end of the film, You said there was a joke in the edit room about how like his prosthetic arm should clang onto the rock beneath him, but it would have undercut the moment. But I think Gizmodo had a piece on this where they asked like, wait, so Ryan, Luke's prosthetic arm vanishes with him at the end of the film. Are you then saying that prostheses are like metaphysically part of the person? Is that what you're saying, Ryan?
They are just as much a part of the person as Yoda's robes are part of him when he disappears with them.
But not Luke's robes. Not Luke's robes, because Luke's robes don't disappear.
Luke's cape does not, but his clothing goes with him.
Gotcha. All right. So clothing, but not capes. What is it about capes that you think?
This is not a Terminator going back in time situation.
Okay.
People keep their clothes.
Yeah. Kui Jong is like, yes, I figured it out, except there's one caveat: no capes.
Okay, the Holdo maneuver, Ryan. This has really bothered me. I don't know if you saw this like massive article on the Ringer about the Holdo maneuver. Did you see that?
No, I didn't see that.
Oh, okay. It was a great piece that basically tries to understand why the Holdo maneuver doesn't break the entire universe, right? Because the idea of the Holdo maneuver is you can take a ship, ram it light speed into an enemy ship, and that it would like cause incredible amounts of damage. And so if that's possible, why hasn't it been done many times before, I think is one of the questions. And like maybe it's, and you know, this article posits some theories, like maybe it's really difficult to do, although like in the movie she kind of
to do.
I'm sorry, would you say it's really difficult to do? That's the answer?
That doesn't seem very difficult to do, does it?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't seem difficult to do at all. That's why. Yeah. Another theory is like maybe it's not difficult to do, but it's so dangerous that it's been like outlawed as a war crime or something like that.
I would expect it would be, right? I would expect it would be frowned upon.
So did you have an answer for like why the Holdo maneuver hasn't been done more often in the past, or?
You know, I mean, like in the past 30 years between the two, you're just in general going.
Because it seems like a kamikaze would be like a pretty...
The entire history of Star Wars.
Right, the entire history of Star Wars.
Sure. I mean, the dude in it was the A-Wing, right? The kamikaze into the bridge of the Star Destroyer, and that took down in Jedi, you know. So we've seen kamikaze maneuvers before. No, I mean, I think I'm going to be really looking forward to seeing basically what, like, how this is now integrated into the canon. And I'd be fascinated to hear about, I mean, this sounds like a dodge. It's kind of not. I mean, first of all, I has this been done before, period? You know, is this like
maybe she's the first person to thought. Your answer could be, Ryan, is nobody thought of it but me / Holdo.
No one was that crazy.
I mean, that's kind of my. I mean, at this point, it's kind of my answer. I think that, you know, I got to reserve the right for Pablo to build it back into canon if he's like, yeah, this is a thing, and they outlawed it, and whatever. I think there's various ways you can go with it, but it's not like that was the plan to do this. It's this spur of the moment thing. This idea that she gets, that she sits down and fucking does, and it obviously takes everybody completely by surprise. It takes Hux by surprise. The fact that Hux doesn't see it coming means it's probably not a standard military maneuver, and so I think it was something that Holdo just kind of pulled out of her butt in the moment. That's an official canon answer.
Thank you for that.
I can speak to why it didn't happen earlier in this movie, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
That's
please.
Not really the question that's being.
No, but please, like why didn't they just turn around and like kamikaze it and like have the transport ships eject? Well,
because even with their biggest ship doing it, as you can see, it didn't take out the entire force, and they basically they came up with, as soon after Holdo took command and she figured out what the plan was, she remembered this place Crate that they can go to. She formed a plan, and the plan involves the bad guys thinking that it's a plan where they can get completely cleanly away, and actually doing this at any point would have messed that plan up.
Right.
And so anyway,
I got to geek out with you for a second, Ryan, that the moment when she goes through the ships and it's silent for 10 seconds, you probably saw the the note for AMC projectionists that was on the internet, right?
Love that so much.
Yeah, there was a note that basically said, like, for, at about an hour and 10 minutes into this movie, there will be no sound for 10 seconds, and that is intentional. There's an intentional decision on the case of the director. So
do not freak out.
Yeah, do not be alarmed. So
I thought that was awesome.
So how did you conceive of that? Because that is one of the most shocking and beautiful and breathtaking moments of the film, in my opinion.
So awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, it came out really nice. So that was, I had the idea, the early idea I had was, and I storyboarded it all out. I had the silence thing as an idea from very early on. The notion of how do you communicate both the bigness of this and the idea that this is all happening in, a nanosecond, basically. This is like the notion that this event is out of time in a weird way, and communicate the bigness of this beyond it just being another big explosion. So I had the silence thing, and I boarded it out, and we started playing with all that. I had the idea that, okay, it's going to be silent when we're up close seeing all the destruction, and then we'll cut back to the massive wide shot, and only then would the sound catch up with you and you hear the big boom. But the whole thing honestly didn't click until our amazing wizards at ILM came upon the idea of that exposure shift. And that honestly, because we had versions of it before that with just regularly lit ships with just like streaks of white going through them. And it was nowhere near as impactful. It was when that they showed this version of it to me that had that exposure shift. And I was like, oh my God, that makes it all kind of click.
Can you just clarify like what you mean by exposure shift?
Yeah, so you can see when it happens, they light it with it's almost like the lights turn off on all the Star Destroyers, and so the Star Destroyers are silhouette black against the blinding light of the streaks where the debris has gone through the ships. And it happens just on a split second on that first thing where it goes through. And then for the rest of the shots, it's just very striking. It's just a completely different mode of lighting for it. So, but that's, that with any creative project, it's usually like that. You start with the intent, and then bit by bit with the design, you make decisions that kind of get you closer and closer to doing the best version of it possible.
Wow.
It is an incredible moment.
Yeah.
So good. I kind of have a related geek nitpick around all this too. Is there something in the canon that states that, these ships have light speed? They can do so many things. They don't have autopilot. They don't have
Which ones?
Any ship, like in general, right? Like this entire moment rests.
Oh yeah, no, I could have. I thought having to like step back and do it. Well, no, I thought about, God, do I have to put a whole fucking thing in there that does this? And I thought, no. The idea is not so much that she has to be back to actually pilot the ship. The notion is that there's something where there is some protocol when they're that they can tell if a ship is on autopilot, and there's something manual that has to be done every span of every 30 seconds or a minute or something, like a manual ping or something that is a tell that they can't fake, that will give away if the ship is unmanned, basically. But then I was like, I don't want to put a whole thing in.
You want to be moving straws around a diner table.
Yeah, it's kind of it. Yeah.
I want to see that kill switch on the bridge somewhere. That's all.
Okay. Yeah, it's there. Oh, it's there. You didn't see it?
Yeah, it's totally there.
Sharp eyes will catch.
So another geek nitpick question: like, what would have happened if Finn had continued flying into the laser battering ram? I saw a critique that was like, at that moment, Rose says, we're not going to win this by killing what we hate. We're going to do it by saving what we love. Something like that. Sorry, I'm butchering your words, Ryan.
How dare you?
But one of the critiques I saw was like, well, isn't he trying to save what he loves by destroying this laser battering ram?
Well, what does she say? What does she say before that, though? What's the dialogue right before that?
I don't know.
He says, "Why did you stop me?" And she says, "What? I saved you." And what does Poe say? And what is he looking at right before he orders everyone to pull off? The before, he's looking around and saying, "Oh my God, we're not going to make it. We're getting picked up." The last thing he's looking at is that cannon. He says the cannon is charged. It's a suicide. How craftful effect. So we'll never know what happened if Finn went into the cannon. I think it's in my mind, what Poe and Rose obviously think will happen. And given what that cannon looks like, it's pretty likely that it would have been a little bit like a mosquito going into a bug zapper.
Right.
But we never did it, so I guess we'll never know.
Okay. Got it. All right. Understood.
Awesome.
I had this reaction when I saw the opening of this movie, or not the very opening, but when the first scene with Rey and Luke, right? You reshot that, did you not? From the last, it doesn't match the ending of Force Awakens.
Yeah,
is that correct?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they shot that when they shot the Force Awakens, and we shot this when we shot ours. So yeah.
Was it always understood?
That's how movies work, Dave.
Yeah, no, I understand it, but I'm saying, was it always understood that you would pick up, you wanted to pick up right where they left off, and so you're like, well, we can't just use the shots from last time. We need to redo those because we have other things we want to do with those shots.
Yeah.
Curious how that decision making happened.
I mean, to be honest, Daisy was a couple of years, a year or two older when we shot ours. And so even if we had used the previous ones and she looked a certain way, and it wouldn't have matched for several different reasons. But also, yeah, they shot the footage they needed to do that scene, and with ours, there wasn't really an opportunity, and we had to go there anyway to shoot new stuff. So it just made sense to reshoot the few things that even we could have. But yeah, then once we were there, we only had a couple of days there, and we couldn't control the weather, so you just kind of have to go with it.
There was a question that came up a couple times online and also in the chat room of, the whole movie is them being chased. The First Order is chasing the Resistance. People have asked, why didn't the First Order just call in reinforcements rather than chase the ship for a day? Did you have any explanation of that, originally in the movie, or did you
call reinforcements? What do you mean? You mean call in another? Well, I don't know. They have obviously a huge part. They've allocated a massive part of their fleet already to be there. I assume other people are, considering we've read in the opening crawl that they're also busy bringing the galaxy to heel. I'd assume all their other resources are pretty tied up, and add into that they think they have a pretty ironclad lock on the situation, that they think this is just a matter of, this is fine. We just, we chase them a little bit, they'll run out of fuel, it'll all be over. And so right. in their mind, there is no imminent threat of losing them. And I doubt it would make sense from a military perspective to take valuable resources away from conquering the galaxy in order to do it.
All right. Fair enough, Ryan. At the end of the movie, the Salt Planet, I guess I am curious, that is one of the most beautiful visuals, I would say, in the entire Star Wars franchise, of these ships kind of clattering on the ground and the red erupting behind them. So kind of curious, how did you conceive of that? What was that process like? Yeah. And also, one of the Resistance fighters just takes a piece of the planet and eats it. And
who eats a planet?
And who is insane enough to just eat a foreign planet? What's the deal with that?
I loved, the whole, wait a minute, he just tasted the planet. I love that meme. And that, by the way, is our second AD, Matt. We called him Salty after that scene. But, Matthew Sharp is a very sweet guy. But and Gareth Edwards is right next to him, a cameo. No, they're out there, and it looks like snow, but it isn't cold. And he's like, what the hell is this stuff? And for some weird reason, he thinks the way to test that is to taste it.
It's like how every cop has to taste the cocaine.
Yeah,
it's exactly that. Or biting, I guess there's probably some old reason they used to bite coins to see if they were real. it's like that.
Gold is soft.
Whatever weird agricultural background this guy comes from, he thinks he's seen it all. He has a suspicion of what this stuff is, and he's testing his suspicion.
I can't wait to see the new Marvel comic about the planet eater who goes around.
He does. He tastes a little bit of it. It would. It would be funny if he took out a fork. Do you see the video someone made where they had their kids do the scene, and the kid like took out a margarita glass and like salted the rim of the glass with it?
Amazing.
So did you like see in your mind's eye, like I'm seeing ships like, on the ground with like this red trail erupting behind them? Like, was that in your mind's eye when you wrote the scene, or how did it come into being?
Yeah, that was a visual that was, again, very early. That was from back in like the Rick Carter talks. And the initial thing of it was actually want to do a big battle and kind of communicate the violence of the battle. But these are, you don't show blood in Star Wars movies. These are PG-13 movies. And so the initial thing was, wouldn't it be amazing to have a movie where the landscape itself could graphically communicate the violence of the battle? And
a cool concept.
Also the notion that the landscape would evolve during the course of the battle. The idea that at the beginning it's white and pristine, and then it gets scarred and increasingly red. And at the end, after the cannon goes, it blows all the white away. So it's just this red hellscape. And then as Luke comes out and is doing his, coming back into the legend that he needs to be and kind of healing the world, the salt snow falls and turns everything back into pristine white. I really like the idea of the landscape itself having a narrative to it during the course of that whole scene. So,
was that the thinking behind Snoke's like throne room as well, like the great red representation there?
Yeah, well, that was just thinking about Snoke and thinking, well, okay, I like the idea of him actually kind of being like the Wizard of Oz a bit, being physically weak and using theatricality as one of his tools, I guess. He's very strong with the Force, obviously, but he has unlike the Emperor, who's just kind of in a workspace kind of throne, very utilitarian. Snoke has a sense of theatricality and of style. So it was some reason had the idea of this red, and again the idea of the evolution of like during the course of it, the environment itself going from that kind of theatrical red and then having the blazing fire during the fight, and then having it be this gorgeous kind of fiery rain during the scene between.
I got shades of like a Kurosawa's Ran during that whole sequence.
I'll tell you where the more straightforward inspiration came from. The late great Anthony Minghella did a production of Madame Butterfly, the opera, that was, for the staging of it, he had this very graphic lit red background with reflective floor. And while we were I had this idea that it should be red, like curtains back there, and we kept drawing stuff up and it just kind of looked like curtains. And I was like, that's not cool. There's nothing cool about curtains. And then I remembered I had seen this production, this opera, and I started pulling up pictures from it. I was like, it's just this abstract red back there. And then it's only revealed to be even a physical thing when it sets on fire. And then we were onto something. It's cool.
Well, what was the fun? Yeah, I'm looking at the images now. If you Google Anthony Minghella, Madame Butterfly, it looks incredible. Like, what was the solution?
Beautiful, yeah.
What was the solution if it wasn't curtains?
It was curtains. It was a fabric that was straight, and this was actually built into the physical set. It's not like it was. It was an incredible set. It's not like it was green screen and we turned it red. We actually got this red fabric. We stretched it around the entire set, and then Steve came up with a way of lighting it so that it just turned into kind of this pure field of red that still had some slight gradation to it. And then when we got into post, ILM kind of helped remove some of the seams and some of the little telltale signs that it was real fabric.
Interesting. Yeah, I never would have thought like curtains aren't cool, like you said, but thinking back on it,
it's true.
Yeah, it's true. It's true, and thinking back on it, it really does feel seamless when you're in that room. So.
Yeah, it's kind of disorienting. You don't know exactly how deep it is or where you're looking. Yeah.
I really geeked out hard during the movie when like an X-wing flew by a Star Destroyer window and the windows like kind of rattled. Is that the first time that's happened in a Star Wars film? Because I feel like
I honestly don't know. You'd have. I mean, it's the first time I can think. Well, no, when the Falcon goes by. I'm trying to remember if everything rattles in Empire when the Falcon flies by, buzzes the bridge right before it kind of disappears. Everyone kind of like ducks and reacts to the shock of it, but I can't remember if it rattles. But yeah, that's our Top Gun moment, which I like.
Yeah, it was important. Like, I guess it was important for you to give this world like a physicality that way with the sound.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and that's a constant thing in all the movies. Is kind of the physical rattle and roll of these being almost, like car movies set in space rather than spaceship movies per se.
Yeah. All right, just a couple more questions. Rex Daisy on Twitter asked this question. I'm curious about the George Lucas storyline. Or the George Lucas outline. The story group would have you believe that it's still very much in play, but everywhere we've read that Rian has had a clean slate, no one told you what to do. Was the Lucas treatment an inspiration at all? Did you see it? The idea of like Lucas having outlined what was going to happen in the next three films.
I don't know what he's referring to with the story group saying that, so I'm not sure. I won't speak to that. No, I was just given JJ's script. So, I mean, I talked to them about I knew that Lucas had done this outline previous, but my understanding was that it was when JJ came in with Michael Arndt and then with Larry Kasdan, they kind of started from scratch basically. So for me anyway, I know I was just given the script of The Force Awakens, and that was kind of that, along with my knowledge of the previous movies, was what I was working off.
Was there any pushback on killing off Luke? Did you have to clear that?
No, I mean, I wanted it. That's part of, I mean, all of these decisions. That's a big part of the reason I moved up to San Francisco and wanted to go in twice a week and talk everybody through this. I didn't want to just drop a script and surprise everyone and hold my breath that they like it. I wanted to, but I mean, the short answer is no, it wasn't, because I kept them very involved in the thought process that led up to each one of these decisions, including that one. And so it wasn't like springing it on everyone. It was like we had all kind of gone through this creative process together of, okay, this is going to be his arc in it. It's where he gets to by the end of it. Let's think about, we don't know what's going to happen in 9, but what has the most dramatic potential in 9. And so we were all kind of on the same page with it. So no, there was never any kind of submitting it to the board and holding my breath moment.
There's a little bit, and forgive me for this, but there's a little bit of me that thinks it's kind of insane to set about making a trilogy of movies and then letting each person making those movies do whatever they want. You know what I mean? Like knowing that there's going to be 3 movies and yet there's no real overall roadmap for those movies seems kind of crazy. No?
Well, I think it's daring. I think it's putting a lot of faith in each one of the, creators who are making each one of the films. But I don't think it's, I don't know, I guess because, I don't know. I think because I can just imagine, because I'm about to go into it, like on this next trilogy, I'm going to come up with the whole thing, like front to start, and front to back, not front to start. But so, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. But at the same time, I don't know, when you're coming up with the whole thing at once, you're still coming up with it piece by piece. It's not like you have this sudden grand revelation of the entire arc. I mean, even, and then this is, I don't know, I was about to say, like, just to some degree, Lucas did that also with the original trilogy,
Yeah.
He had to, because in his original conception, it ended with, it didn't the whole thing, and I'm sure someone will correct me if I get this wrong, but his original conception, didn't the whole thing end with the Death Star? Or no, it ended with the, anyway, I know by blowing up the Death Star at the end of A New Hope, it kind of threw everything off, so he had to.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, he never thought he would get to make any more of them, so he didn't really, yeah.
Precisely. And so it I think the notion that there's some kind of immaculate conception thing that would happen if they were all conceived of at once and then everyone just stuck to that, knowing how a real creative process happens, I think that's not really reality, you know? And I think that the truth is that, yeah, these are being kind of discovered one at a time. But I think it's not like we're just running willy-nilly. We're still thinking very carefully about what came before, and even thinking carefully, even if not in specifics, but in terms of dramatic potential of what's going to come next. And I think that when we get to the end of the whole thing, even the way in which it is crazy and the way in which it's leading to stuff that wouldn't have come about if the whole thing had just been laid out on a whiteboard at the start, I think is really interesting. And I think it's leading to creative decisions and directions that might never have happened if anybody had just, come up with an outline at the very start and we had all stuck to it. So anyway, it cool. Is fascinating, but I think it's, I for one am really interested, but I'm very happy that this is how it's being done for this one.
I want to ask you about the trilogy, but one other quick question. How did you decide to name the film, or did you decide to name the film? And what do you think makes for a good Star Wars film name?
Yeah, I don't know. I think
hit me with some alternate titles, Ryan.
There were none. That's the thing that very early, when I started writing the script, actually, I wrote the title page, and it was The Last Jedi. That was it. And I never had another title. And I was, so I was holding my breath throughout all of production because I had the title from the beginning. Every time, I was wondering if it was going to leak, or even if someone would guess it. I thought it was a pretty obvious title. But in terms of what makes a good Star Wars title, I don't know. I'm very thankful that I had that one that felt like a very good one at the start, because I can just imagine if we had like, what do we call our band type sessions? I'm sure nightmarish trying to pick apart what makes a great Star Wars title. Let's analyze the syllables in this. But in this case, I don't know. It was just a very, to me, it was just something I had from the beginning. So all right. Very intuitive.
Well, you have to come up with 3 more of them at least now.
Well, yeah. On that note, Ryan, I was thrilled to hear that you are going to be gainfully employed for the foreseeable future. With this,
what's it like? What's it like knowing that the next decade of your life is committed?
It's great. I know it's weird. Like I've had friends like ask me like, God, don't you just like think about it in those terms and just have your shoulders sag a little? Like, and I'm like, no, it's the exact opposite. I feel like just the potential of what we could do with this is so exciting, and it's kind of everything I ever wanted to make movies for. I think it's kind of the ultimate creative challenge, and the idea of the experience we could give people with one story told over 3 movies, and just the sky's the limit. I'm just like, I'm so excited about it. Yeah, I feel.
You're making me excited about it too.
Yeah, good.
I am very excited as well. But a part of me did wonder: will we see another original Rian Johnson movie?
Well, yeah, I am actually, and that's the thing. I'm still figuring out. Okay, what's the timing of these going to be? Can I fit something in even before we start on them? I don't know. We're working it out. I mein, in my mind, I honestly, I appreciate that. It's strange though. I don't. Even with this one, even with The Last Jedi, I in my own mind, I don't have separation in my head. Like, oh, I'll get back to doing my own movies next. Like, this felt just as personal and meaningful to me as any of the films I've made. And I'm sure that, the trilogy will as well. But that having been said, I think it'll be healthy to do non-Star Wars stuff. I just have to figure out exactly what, the schedule is going to look like, how to fit it in.
Well, I hope that I mean, some directors do the one for them, one for me kind of thing. It sounds like what you're saying is that the Star Wars movies are one for you in some way.
It's all for me. All of it. It's me. No, yeah, that's how I genuinely feel. I don't know if I could ever do one for them. It's movies are a lot of work. It's not for you. I don't know. Fundamentally selfish person, I guess.
All right. Well, Ryan, I could spend another 90 minutes talking with you about this movie.
Are you kicking me out? Dave, are you kicking me out?
I'm not. I could hang out longer. I want to be respectful of your time.
This has been absolutely awesome.
It has been so amazing.
It's so much fun, man. This has been such a good conversation. I missed you guys.
Missed you too, man. Devindra, did you have any questions? I know, I asked some of them.
Anything else?
Anything else?
I mean,
big or small, hard.
There's so much. There's so much.
Yes.
Banjo time.
Back. I guess the big one for me, though, when we were talking about this during our review, I think we noticed that, this movie, Star Wars in general, always had a lot of Kurosawa influences. We know Hidden Fortress and everything. This one in particular seems, I don't know, seems like a more direct homage.
Rashomon is in there, for instance.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, was that something you were doing consciously? And what were the major influences for you going into this film?
For me, it was... No, it's not like I sat down and thought, how do I get more Kurosawa? And he's one of my favorite filmmakers, and I know his films really well, and so it makes sense that a lot of that stuff would. And coming up with, when I was cracking the whole Luke arc, and that was actually a piece that came very late in the writing. It was in the rewriting, actually. There was many versions of the script that didn't have that whole subplot, and when I came up with that, obviously it was a Rashomon thing, but no, for me, it was, World War II. I watched a lot of World War II movies. I've called out 12 O'Clock High a lot, Dam Busters, and I went back and rewatched a bunch of World War II movies. I was also, though, honestly, I don't know, the influence for me was mainly Star Wars. But just trying to, tonally, trying to capture when I was because I absorbed those first movies basically between the ages of 4 and 11, and trying to capture what was fun about the movies to me. That was something that was really important to me, was that it would be fun, especially considering some of the heavier stuff we're going to get into. They would be fun for kids to watch, not just as we got to get kids in there, but because that's how I connected to this universe, was as a kid. That's the foundation of why I love this stuff, is not my adult fandom, but my kid fandom. And it felt really important to try and get that sense of fun into it, in addition to all this stuff. So for that, I was just thinking about my experience of the original Star Wars movie. And then to a certain extent, honestly, I love the tone that JJ struck in The Force Awakens. Also, I think that it's got that Larry Kasdan spark of just, very light on its feet, fun and to it. And so, anyway, yeah.
Well, that's why the movie is so special and such an emotional experience for me, because it especially that last moment with the broom kid, it feels like what I loved about Star Wars that honestly kind of left the series for a brief period in the 90s, that feeling that I could be Luke Skywalker. Anybody can. And the fact that was sort of gifted back to me felt pretty important and powerful.
Thanks, man. That's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
Ryan, I got to ask you, I know I said we were done, but I do want to ask you this question, because I feel like, I was saying this on our podcast episode, but that it has been truly remarkable to observe your journey. I think the first time we met, I was interviewing you because you just made The Brothers Bloom, which I had ranked as one of my favorite films of that year. And I remember reading interviews with you talking about Brick, which I think is a film that you shot for around $500,000. So so in the last decade or so, you've gone from Brick, which is an ultra low budget movie, to basically one of the highest budget movies ever, or one of the highest budget franchises ever. What were some of the biggest challenges you had to deal with when it came to working from a crew of 30 or 40 to a crew of thousands or many hundreds?
my experience of it has been, I mean, it just the bigger, and that I guess coming in, every single time, first of all, you make something a little bigger, you have that kind of dry patch in the back of your throat of, oh my God, is this going to be a different thing? Am I going to know how to do this? And that it happens, it happened even not making Brick, because I had just made movies with my friends. I just shot with video cameras before that, and like not professional actors, and cut it together on my computer. And I was like, now I actually have a professional crew and a real film camera. And so it's like, oh God, is this going to be a different thing? And then you get on set and you realize, no, you're telling the story, and you know the story you want to tell, and you just take the camera and tell the story. And then Brothers Bloom, it was like, oh my God, that was, a tiny budget movie that I did as a weird little thing. And suddenly I've got millions of dollars and we're on these locations with these big actors, and is this going to be a different thing? And then no, you get on set and you just figure it out and do it. And it's the same basic tools to the same basic ends all the way up, and even including Star Wars. Honestly, and I've said this elsewhere, and I really found this was really my experience, that ultimately the machinery and the size of the budget, and it kind of doesn't, not that it doesn't matter. It obviously has effects on the process, but in terms of what really matters, it doesn't matter, I guess. It's you're still trying to do the same thing, which ultimately is connect with the audience, and making the scenes work with the actors is the only thing that really does that. And doesn't matter, how many cameras you have, how many cranes, how many whatevers. That's what you're chasing, and whether it's with a short or with a Star Wars movie, it's the same basic tools to the same basic ends.
Well, you make it look easy, Ryan. Brian Davids in the chat room says Ryan was like that underground band you know about and didn't want the mainstream to find out about. I feel the same way. I mean, it's really upsetting that we need to share you with the world now, Ryan. But that's the way life goes sometimes. If you love something, set it free, right?
Never set me free, David. Never. Keep me in your heart-shaped box forever. Please,
I will do the best I can, Ryan. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Ryan, and I would say where you can find more of your work on the internet, but everyone already knows. It's in theaters.
Literally everywhere.
Literally everywhere, as contractually obligated by Disney. You can find Ryan on Twitter as well. And find more episodes of this podcast at SlashFilmcast.com. If you like content like this, as well as Ryan, I don't think you're aware of this, but we did 4 hours worth of podcasting about The Last Jedi. So find more discussion of that if this didn't give you enough. But Ryan, again, congratulations on all your success, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much, guys. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time on the SlashFilmcast.
We watch the movies, flicks, tracks for the good, bad. It's the SlashFilmcast. For all the news and the movies coming out, 'cause you know that it's the thing worth talking about.